Good morning, everyone. We're right at 9 o'clock, which means it's time to start our July Mornings with OKeefe program. My name is Molly. I'm the Adult Programs Manager here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and we are very glad that you're joining us today. I'd like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I'd also like to extend a thank you to the members and donors who are here today because with your support, events like this are possible. If you enjoy this event and you're not yet a member and are interested in learning more, please consider joining and visit our website at gokm.org/membership to learn more. Throughout this talk, please place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. For the duration of the lecture, the chat box has been disabled. Please note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum's website in about a week or two. Captions in both English and Spanish will be available. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter this morning, Giustina Renzoni. Justina joined the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2018. As the Curator of Historic Properties, she oversees tours, programs, and exhibitions connected to Georgia O'Keeffe's two historic homes. Previously, Justina held various museum positions at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver, and the Denver Art Museum and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. In addition, as a contemporary art curator, Justina has organized exhibitions highlighting up-and-coming local artists for galleries in Boston and Colorado. She received her BA in Cultural Anthropology from the Northeastern University in Boston and an MA in Art History from the University of Colorado in Boulder. So thank you so much, Justina. We're so excited to hear you talk today about this topic, and we look forward to having a Q&A session at the end of your presentation.
Thank you so much, Molly. I'm super excited to talk to everyone today about our newest exhibition at the O'Keeffe Welcome Center in Abiquiú, Artful Living, O'Keeffe in Modern Design. So I'm going to go ahead and get that PowerPoint shared. Okay, fantastic. All right, so as I said, Artful Living is on view at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Welcome Center in Abiquiú, and it is on view until January 2026. I'm going to start with one of my favorite O'Keeffe quotes. Georgia O'Keeffe purchased her home here in Abiquiú in 1945, but she did not see it the first time in 1945. She actually saw it for the first time in the mid-1930s. And she said, when I first saw the Abiquiú house, it was a ruin with an adobe wall around the garden, broken in a couple of places by falling trees. It took me 10 years to get it, 3 more years to fix the house so I could live in it. And after that, the wall with the door was painted many times. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe had this dream of owning her own home, and she had the opportunity to purchase her first New Mexico home in 1940 at Ghost Ranch. She purchased about 7 acres from the owner of the ranch, Arthur Pack, and along with that 7 acres was a small home that I would say was a turnkey property. So it had only been built a few years before in 1933. So when O'Keeffe moved into that home, it was ready to go. And while she did make changes to that building, it did not have the same personal stamp that we see here in Abiquiú. And that's because when she purchased her second New Mexico home here in Abiquiú, it was more or less in ruins. The home has about 200 years of history before O'Keeffe purchased it. And as an adobe house, over 7,000 square feet, it had been left vacant for several years before O'Keeffe purchased it. And when adobe homes are not maintained, they're exposed to snow, to rain, and the adobe actually starts to melt. So when O'Keefe finally purchased the home in 1945, the adobe walls had started melting, some of the ceilings had caved in, so it was more or less a ruin as she described it. Now, this was a wonderful opportunity to reconstruct the home how she wanted it. And in order to do that, she hired her friend Maria Chabot to be the general contractor of the construction project. Unfortunately, the purchase of the Abiquiú home timing was not great because Georgia O'Keeffe's husband, Alfred Stieglitz, passed away several months after she purchased the home. She had to stay in New York City to deal with Stieglitz's estate. As a gallery owner, art collector, photographer, he had an extensive art collection, and O'Keeffe was tasked with distributing that collection to museums and universities throughout the country. So dealing with Stieglitz's estate took a few years. As a result, she asked Maria Chabot to stay in Abiquiú in her stead, and luckily, the workers that were hired for the project were willing to share their knowledge and their expertise on adobe construction with Maria. And what ended up happening is this house really was co-designed by Maria Chabot and Georgia O'Keeffe. All of the designs and construction decisions that were made were discussed via letters, which luckily, although it is out of print, it is still available online. There is a small book with all of the letters from 1941 to 1949. And Chabot described the house, saying, "I'd never found anything as romantic as this beat-up building, a ruin really. It took 6 months just to get the pigs out of the house." So what we're trying to get across here is this idea that O'Keeffe is almost starting from scratch. So they decided to keep the original footprint of the house, and they also decided to maintain as much of the original architectural features as possible. This meant that 22,000 adobe bricks had to be made to rebuild the home. As you can see in these photos here, we have some of the adobe bricks being made in that right-hand photo. And this also meant there was lots of opportunity to incorporate some more modern features. So when O'Keeffe's home was finally finished in 1949, it really did embrace regional architecture, but at the same time circumvented some of those norms by incorporating very large picture windows, skylights throughout. A lot of walls were knocked down or not rebuilt within the interior to improve the interior flow, what we would today call an open concept plan. And most importantly, O'Keeffe brought in a lot of modern furnishings for her home. Now, when we're looking at this house, I want us to think about the concept of holistic design. And what that means is that we're considering the whole environment. It's not just the individual components that are being considered, as O'Keeffe is really creating her dream home, as she's creating this artist sanctuary here in the desert. She's thinking about how everything works together. And that starts with the construction of the home, the architectural layout, but then that also includes the hardware that's being used, the different types of ceilings in each room, and of course, the modern decor that she is bringing into her home. And although she moves into the home in 1949 and construction is finished, she does not stop changing the home. Okay, so the home continues to change throughout the entirety of the time she lives there, from 1949 until 1984, when those last 2 years of her life, she goes down to Santa Fe to be closer to medical care. And although she is here in Abiquiú, which is quite remote, she is still able to stay very tapped into what's going on with design trends in places like Chicago and New York. And part of the way that she's able to do that is through these personal relationships that she develops with designers. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. So here in the Abiquiú house, O'Keefe is able to build this home that gives her the opportunity to really experiment with color, with texture, pattern. She's really being intentional about what type of objects she's bringing into her home. So her homewares, her furnishings, and I think a great place to start is by looking at this case we have in the exhibition. So here we have highlighted some of the homewares that O'Keefe brought into this space. And O'Keefe was undoubtedly inspired by Northern European design. So just in this case alone, we have a few examples. We have this beautiful dish set, and that is by Arabia, a Finnish dishware company. And so at this time, in the 50s and 60s, Arabia is starting to make its way into a lot of American homes. We also have a Kopko kettle, so that is something that is Scandinavian design. We have a Chemex, which although it was created in the United States, the designer himself was from Germany. And we have a beautiful Krennet bowl, which again is another example of Scandinavian design. Now, O'Keefe is not the only American fascinated with all of these designs that are coming out of Northern Europe in the mid-century. After the war, people in the United States are much more interested in the principles of simplicity, functionality, and minimalism. And Northern European design happens to encapsulate all of that. It was a really refreshing departure from the ornate styles of the past. And so these clean lines, natural materials, and emphasis on craftsmanship, that really resonated with Americans, not just Georgia O'Keeffe. And then there's also this sense of experimentation. So when we look at the Arabia dishware set, this was actually one of O'Keeffe's favorite sets of dishes. This is what she used on a daily basis. And part of what made this so special is that this is the first dishware set Arabia made that was oven safe. And so Keith loved that you could just put your enchiladas onto the plate and stick it in the oven to heat it up. So something I think that we've sort of taken for granted, but at the time was really unconventional and groundbreaking. Now, O'Keeffe not only brought Northern European homewares and furnishings into her home, she also brought textiles into her home and into her daily life. So when we're thinking about the homewares that she's bringing into the home, this is not simply decor. These are objects that she's using in her day-to-day life. Same here with the textiles that O'Keeffe is wearing. The way that she's dressing is very intentional. It's very thoughtful, thinking about design. And when we look at a great example here of Mary Mecco, this is another company that is from Finland, but by the mid-century was really working its way into the American lifestyle. And this was something that was done really, deliberately by the Mary Mecco company. So when Mary Mecco launched in the United States, they were targeting a female audience, and they were specifically trying to connect with artists, intellectuals, and architects. And so many people considered the Mary Mecco dress the uniform of the intellectuals in the United States. The founder of Mary Mecco said, our clothes must be loose and express movement. They're part of modern interiors and modern life. So right there is this idea that with holistic design, with modern living, every single aspect of your day-to-day life is being considered and being lived artfully. So for Georgia O'Keeffe, these beautiful textiles were perfect for living here in Abiquiú. Most of the dresses she purchased are lightweight cotton, really ideal for when you're here in the desert, especially in those summer months. Allowed for a lot of movement. So O'Keeffe is someone that is going on daily walks, going hiking, moving throughout her property when she's painting, when she's getting her canvases ready. And what made Mary Mecca so remarkable, it was really these saturated colors and these bold prints. Now, often we don't think of Georgia O'Keeffe as someone who really embraced color in her wardrobe. And that's because she often presented herself in her infamous black and white wrap dress. Now, that was a really specific choice made by O'Keeffe to present herself as a serious artist. She thought that dressing in all black, appearing serious in photos, that was a way to communicate to the world that she was someone who should be taken seriously. But here in this wonderful photo in the middle, taken by her good friend Todd Webb, she's posing in front of her lilac bush here at the Abiquiú house, and she has her two chow chows with her. And she also happens to be wearing a Mary Mecca dress. So in the 50s and 60s, as she is allowing more candid photography of herself, especially photographs taken by close friends that are photographers, she's opting to wear these Mary Mecca dresses in these photos. So this is signaling to us as an audience that in these photos, this is a real peek into who Georgia O'Keeffe is on a day-to-day basis, not the posed public persona that she was often presenting to the rest of the world. Now, as part of this exhibition here, when you come to the Welcome Center to see it, hopefully, you'll see that we have this beautiful setup right when you walk in, and we've chosen to highlight some of the furnishings in O'Keeffe's home. And so a lot of the furnishings here in the exhibition are American-made mid-century modernism. So modern design, as I said, was becoming popular in the United States as a result of Northern European design, such as Scandinavian or Finnish design. And so O'Keeffe was someone who traveled quite a bit. She traveled to New York, she traveled to Chicago, so she was quite aware of the different design trends that were going on. And she also had a lot of friends that were designers, including Ray and Charles Eames, Osamu Noguchi, Alexander Gerard, his wife Susan. And so these friendships really allowed her to not only be in tune with what's going on with different trends, but also a way for her to connect with peers that had similar design and aesthetic sensibilities. Um, and so here in this front room, we have just a few examples that I wanted to point out. Now, O'Keeffe had quite a bit of furniture. She was furnishing both her house here in Abiquiú as well as her house at Ghost Ranch. But here in Abiquiú, we really see how the furniture is connected directly to the space that it's placed in. And so just to start, I'm going to point out the Noguchi Akari lantern. So this is an example of a Noguchi Akari lantern. The original is still hanging up in the dining room at the Abiquiú house. And this was a gift from the Japanese-American designer Osamu Noguchi. He had plans to visit O'Keeffe. When something came up, he was unable to make it. He sent his sister with this lantern as a gift to O'Keeffe. She had it installed in her dining room, and it became the only permanent light fixture in the home with a shade. Everything else in the home, you'll see they are just bare bulbs. And so she decided that she was going to have this lantern installed using a pulley system purchased from a local hardware store. And the reason she did this is so that she could actually lower and raise the lantern to create different types of lighting and ambiance in her dining space. So if she was having a smaller, more intimate dinner party, then she might want to lower the lantern and have a slightly darker room, a slightly more intimate lighting experience. And so this is just a terrific example of how O'Keeffe is customizing the furnishings that she's bringing into her home. And she's really thinking about how these furnishings actually work within this specific space. Another great example here of furniture is this Eames LCW chair. Now, O'Keefe had a lot of furniture, but what I discovered is that what she had the most of is chairs. She liked to collect chairs. She had many, many different kinds. And what I think is so interesting here with the LCW chair, she had multiples of this. So this is a chair she really appreciated. She had this chair in black, she had this chair in red, and I think it really speaks to her appreciation of experimentation, of technology. When Ray and Charles Eames brought this chair to the market, this was a direct result of their development of molded plywood, something that happened with a contract from the US government to develop leg splints for injured soldiers during the war. So using this government contract, Ray and Charles Eames really perfected the process of molded plywood. And then after the war, they were able to go on and use that technique to create furniture. So it's not surprising to me that O'Keefe would have several of these in her collection, quite comfortable chairs, and again, really embracing experimentation and technology, both values that we know O'Keefe appreciated. Now, this chair here on the left, again, we have a great example of experimenting with materials. This aluminum framing was really unusual. And we also have a great example of customization. So O'Keefe made this green custom pillow that you see here on this bar wall lounger. So this bar wall lounger was designed by Edgar Bartolucci and Jack Waldom. And you can see with this chair that it's a chair you want to sit down, you want to lay back, you want to relax. So this was perfect for O'Keefe to have in her sitting room, the place where she loved to go at the end of the day, turn on some Baroque classical music. She would sit in one of these bar wall loungers, close her eyes, and just listen to the music. It turns out she decided this was also a great camping chair. Although it is not compact, it is very lightweight, easy to tie on top of the car, and she said it was perfect for stargazing. Now, thinking about designers that she was friends with, her closest designer friends were really Alexander Gerard and his wife, Susan. Alexander Gerard was a textile designer and an architect. For those of you watching that have been to Santa Fe or from the area, hopefully you've had time to visit the Folk Art Museum and seen the Gerard Wing, where there are hundreds of small objects Gerard purchased on his travels and set up into small dioramas. So as a folk art collector, Gerard had a really diverse and international design sensibility. And Gerard and his wife Susan actually traveled quite a bit with Georgia O'Keeffe, who was an avid traveler herself. And here in the kitchen, this pillow in the center, that is one of Gerard's iconic designs, the Love in Many Languages pillow. So Gerard would actually give O'Keeffe various textiles, and then she would make those into pillows, which she had throughout the house. Now, the house as you see it today, it is very neutral in color, but O'Keeffe said she really liked a pop of color in every room, and that pop of color was almost always red, orange, or blue. And so here in this stark white kitchen, we of course have this pop of red that was from Alexander Gerard. Now, another fun part of this exhibition was this wonderful digital interactive that the team made, where we give you an opportunity to read some of O'Keeffe's personal correspondence with the Gerards. So if you come into the exhibition, you'll be able to see these handwritten letters from O'Keeffe, who has notoriously difficult handwriting to read. And then on the right-hand side are the transcriptions. So here's just an example of one of the letters. She writes in 1957, "Dear Susan Gerard, thanks so much for thinking to send the creme au chocolat recipe. I will be bringing it one day. The evening with you and your husband was so pleasant. We enjoyed it very much. I look forward to you coming to Abiquiú again and when you return from the East. I have received a very large volume from your brother, The Wonder That Was India, by Basham. As I read in spots before I begin, at the beginning it looks most interesting. I'm so pleased with his thinking to send it. Let me hear when you are home again. My greetings and thoughts to Alexander, please. Sincerely, Georgia O'Keefe." Now, it was really important that we included some of this correspondence because there's also a myth out there that O'Keefe was antisocial, that she was a real recluse. And although she enjoyed solitude and privacy, she actually did have a lot of friends and she did enjoy socializing with them. Alexander and Susan remained her closest friends throughout her time here in New Mexico. They lived in Santa Fe. She would often go to visit them. And in one of her letters to them, she wrote, "When you start making a home, it is difficult to stop changing it, imagining it different." And I think that's certainly true for her home here in Abiquiú. So here's a black and white photo of the home in 1964. If this photo was in color, um, you would be able to see that it's almost entirely black and white, the decor here, except for the pillows and textiles that are on the banco. And we have here in the background, you see a couple of the bar wall loungers, you have a couple chairs strewn about, but most notably, the large picture windows that are very iconic and seen when you visit the home today, they are not there. So this is just a really great example of how O'Keefe not only played with interior design through decor, through furnishings, but also by changing the physicality of the home. So here's that same room in 1965. Okay, so between the time the last photo was taken and this photo was taken, the large picture windows are installed in this home. And as you can see, they are divided into three, perfectly framing the tamarisk or salt cedar tree that sits right outside. A lot of folks are surprised when they see these photos from the 1960s from Baltazar Korab, just because of how much color there really is in the space. You can see here she's really embracing these textiles, these pillows that were all custom made, textiles she collected on her travels. Not only does she have plants inside, but she has cuttings from her beautiful forsythia bush. And just to go back to the last page, in the lower right-hand photo here, you can see the rattlesnake skeleton in its plexi box. So this was gifted to O'Keefe, and her friend that sent it to her sent it in this plexi box so that it could be displayed on a shelf. And O'Keefe moved it around the sitting room quite a bit. But if you look here at the photo in 1965, right below that ceramic jar with the forsythia branches is a small indentation in the banco. And that is because O'Keefe decided that the rattlesnake skeleton should be embedded into the banco, really becoming a part of the home. Also in this photo, directly next to this Mies van der Rohe table are these adobe mounds that are coming right out of the ground. So this created some permanent seating around this table. This is a Mies van der Rohe Barcelona table. When O'Keefe purchased it, she decided that the height was not fitting for this space. She wanted to be able to sit on the banco and still have her knees under the table. So she actually decided to have the legs recast at a taller height. Another great example of customization. Now, One beautiful thing about adobe is that it's a very forgiving material. It allows for experimentation. So, looking at the room the way that we have it today, we have it staged in the early 1980s, how O'Keefe left it. You'll notice around that glass top table, there are no longer adobe mounds. And that's because when she got tired of them, all you had to do was pour water on top and they disintegrated, and she was able to replace them with these velvet floor cushions instead. I'll also point out that there is a fireplace on the right-hand wall. The other fireplace in the room never worked quite well, so at some point in the late 60s, 70s, she had this second fireplace built into the wall. So as you can see, just over the course of one decade, how many changes are really taking place? And I think this just highlights how much O'Keeffe appreciated playing with her space. And in playing with her space, like I said, she's experimenting with texture. Here in this photo, we have these velvet cushions, velvet pillows against the adobe. She's playing with color, looking at neutral color palettes, black and white color palettes, really colorful, bright color palettes. And when we think about O'Keeffe's process as an artist, someone who would paint on an easel, but then move her paintings into her home and actually live with them for a while to determine whether they were truly finished or not, it made sense that she was always playing with her space because she is really creating an environment that fosters creativity, that encourages experimentation, and you see that come through in her artwork. Throughout her prolific career, O'Keeffe is always experimenting, always trying new things. And she's doing this as well in her home, both with the design and how she's actually living in the space, the objects she's using in her day to day life, how she's dressing herself. And so I think it's fair to say that O'Keeffe lived artfully. And the Abiquiú home and studio, I like to say it's one of Georgia O'Keeffe's largest works of art. She's very intentional with how she's setting up the space and how she's living in it. So again, Artful Living, O'Keeffe and Modern Design is on view here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Welcome Center in Abiquiú. It's open through January 2026. It is free to the public. So you can come in anytime. Tuesday through Saturday, we are open year round. As a friendly reminder, we offer tours of the home and studio Tuesday through Saturday, March through November. However, we really encourage you to make reservations in advance. We do sell out. So if you're planning on coming to see the exhibition, you're hoping to get a tour of the home and studio as well, just make sure that you are purchasing your tickets well ahead of time. All right, so that brings me to the end of my presentation, and Molly is going to read out some of your questions.
Hi, everyone. Justina, thank you so much. That was so informative, so beautiful. Despite being in Santa Fe, I felt like I was really there in the space, and it was incredible to hear more about these intentional choices that Georgia O'Keeffe made in order to bring art into every aspect of her life. I'll mention quickly that I became disconnected. I hope that didn't affect anyone else here in the room, but that cleared the chat box. So if you asked a question and wouldn't mind to put it back in there so I can read it, that would be terrific. But in the meantime, something I would love to ask you a little bit more about, Justina, is some of the natural objects that Georgia O'Keeffe has in those spaces that you showed us photographs of. So we have these pieces of designed furniture and textiles, but we also see, as you mentioned briefly, the rattlesnake skeleton, but also rocks and tree branches. Can you talk a little bit about how those objects also are factored into her designs?
Absolutely. So when you think about natural objects, they're really the original perfect designs, right? There's no better designer than the natural world. And when O'Keefe moved here to New Mexico, what was really missing for her when she was living in New York City was this connection to the natural world. So when she has this opportunity to create her dream home, part of what she's hoping to do is to basically reduce the barrier between her and the natural world around her. And so all throughout the home, whether it's through these large picture windows, whether it's by bringing in rocks, bones, plants, tree stumps, driftwood, she is doing everything she can to blur that boundary between the interior and the exterior. Now, this was something that was really common with the modernist architects in the mid-century. She was not the only one doing this. So again, it was right on trend. But also when we think about O'Keefe, the person, someone who was born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, to dairy farmers, grew up on a farm, she is someone who had her very foundational youth really in the natural world. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that when she comes here to New Mexico, she wants to bring all of these natural objects directly into her home and into her artwork. We see, of course, with the flower paintings that she is bringing these flowers from flower stands in New York into her studio. Then when she's here in New Mexico, she's collecting rocks, collecting bones, and all of these objects are also very intentional and appreciated for their texture, their color, their pattern, their overall design.
Thank you. That makes so much sense. And especially knowing that some of these objects feature in her paintings, some of the paintings that we all know and love so much. I'm going to combine a couple of these questions. We have a question about preservation. So someone here, Ryan, has a question about some of the textiles that are featured in the photographs and some of the textiles that are still on display today. How are they holding up after all this time? And can you take that as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about preservation as a whole? We know that people from the general public are visiting Georgia O'Keeffe's home. How do you, as the curator of these properties, keep these places safe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so first I'll say we have such a fantastic team here at the O'Keeffe Museum, our conservator Dale Cronkray and our registrar Judy Chiba Smith. They're really the point people when it comes to preservation and protecting these objects. Now, I will say that we are really lucky as an organization to not only have these historic properties, but the personal belongings inside of them. It's very rare to have a historic house that is more or less set up the way that the artist truly left it. And along with that, we have a lot of textiles, a lot of furnishings. And so we're constantly assessing how our objects are holding up. Now, because these are objects that were lived with, a lot of them were basically proofed during O'Keeffe's lifetime. So they were exposed to light, exposed to different humidity levels, temperature levels. So they pretty much hold up on their own. Some of the objects, though, especially textiles, are a bit more fragile. And so we make sure that we're rotating the textiles out of the space. And we have a separate textile vault in Santa Fe that is humidity controlled, temperature controlled, light controlled. And so every spring, for example, one of my favorite activities is going through the closet outside of O'Keeffe's bedroom and going through the textiles, assessing whether anything needs to be changed out, and then setting up the closet with a fresh new look every season. And again, we're so lucky because we just have so many of these objects, so it makes it quite easy to cycle through the objects that are most sensitive and most vulnerable.
Wonderful. Kind of pivoting off that a little bit, we have a comment from Jackie who says, I learned so much more about O'Keeffe when visiting Abiquiú. This presentation was especially helpful in appreciating her special space even more. Thank you. So just to use that as a bit of a talking point, can you talk a little bit more about what a special situation it is. So we have the museum here in Santa Fe that has the permanent collection of artworks by Georgia O'Keeffe, some of her possessions that, like you just mentioned, but also really just down the road, these preserved spaces in which she lived. Would you talk a little bit about how having both of those things, maybe is that something that's pretty rare as far as talking about an artist from an academic point of view?
Oh, absolutely. There are a few other examples in the United States where you have a fine art museum with the artist's artwork, and then you have a historic home nearby. But in many of those scenarios, the homes are not necessarily set up with the personal belongings set up the way the artist left it. So for us to have not just one, but two historic houses is really unprecedented. And to have a museum dedicated to a woman artist, in and of itself is remarkable. To have such an extensive collection of her artwork, and then to be able to come here and actually see the landscape that inspired much of the artwork, to see the studios and spaces where she was actually creating the artwork. I think it's what makes the O'Keeffe Museum so special, because you really have an opportunity to immerse yourself in this artist's way of life. Um, I like to recommend, if you have lots of time and you plan in advance, that you should actually see the artwork in Santa Fe. Come do a tour of the Abiquiú home and studio. Make sure you're traveling around Abiquiú, going to places like Ghost Ranch, and then go back to the museum in Santa Fe and actually see the artwork again. Now that you've seen where she lived, now that you've seen for yourself the landscape that inspired much of her artwork, it's going to change the way that you see the work that Georgia O'Keeffe created. And I will mention now, because I have said that we have two historic houses. So we have the Abiquiú home and studio here in Abiquiú, about a half mile from the O'Keeffe Welcome Center, about 13 miles up the road. We also have her other New Mexico home at Ghost Ranch. Now, Ghost Ranch itself is run by the Presbyterian Church as a retreat center. It's 22,000 acres. The O'Keeffe Museum owns about 7 acres with O'Keeffe's house on it. The house is not currently open to the public. I get that question a lot. But I want to let everyone know we are in the process of doing really, really important conservation work for that home, with the hope that we will be able to open it to the public sometime in the near future.
That is so exciting to hear. That's great. So stay tuned, everyone, because we even had that question in the chat. So that's great. Commenting on that. So sort of on the other side of that same coin, of course, we know that being able to visit the museum in person, being able to visit the home in person is the ideal experience. But many of our friends who are joining us today are from all over the country, sometimes all over the world. What are some things that are coming down the line for being able to access images or experiences related to these spaces for folks who aren't physically here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first I'll say that the O'Keeffe Museum has an incredibly extensive collections online. And the collections online is going to let you see all of the artworks we have here at the O'Keeffe Museum, but it's also going to give you an opportunity to look at photography of O'Keeffe's life, including photography of the interior spaces of her home. So there's a lot to be seen just by looking at our collections online and what we have in the archives. I also recommend a book that we do sell through the O'Keeffe Museum. It's Georgia O'Keeffe in Her Houses. Now, this book really goes into both the Ghost Ranch house and the Abiquiú house, from the beginning of construction, renovations, changes that happened, goes room by room. So if you're interested in learning more about the historic properties, that is a great resource to start. And another project that is much further down the line, but we do hope to have a virtual tour of the home and studio available in the future. So for visitors that are not able to come here in person, to at least be able to have a virtual experience of the Abiquiú home and studio.
That is also very exciting, and good to know, since these days we have these resources, these virtual resources that can help put us in places that we might not actually get to visit in person. So that's
And
good.
Molly, I'll add one more thing. We also are in the process of creating a digital exhibition catalog for Artful Living. So we're hoping to have that online, free, available to the public by the fall. And so it'll include a lot of the text from the exhibition, some additional writing, as well as lots of the photographs featured in the exhibition.
Wonderful. Okay, so stay tuned, everyone, and you can dive in a little more deeply very soon. So let's pivot back a little bit more to some specific decisions that Georgia O'Keeffe made for her home. Someone would like to know, did she collect and display any other artists' paintings? We know she displayed other design pieces, but what about like paintings and other fine arts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So O'Keeffe did not have a substantial collection of other artists' work. She certainly had some notable works, including a painting by Arthur Dove, a mobile by Alexander Calder, a ceramic work by Toshiko Takaetsu. So there were a few objects that came into the home. I think the Alexander Calder mobile for her was really part of the design of the space. But she said that above all else, she really preferred blank walls. For her, blank walls were what was needed for her creativity. And so she very rarely hung up artwork by other artists, especially other painters in her home. And even her own artwork, although it would get hung up, it was constantly being moved around. So if you come visit the home today, you'll see we have a lot of nails sticking out of the adobe walls. And so she really treated that space and those walls almost like a gallery where she would move her artwork around. She'd often have the walls blank. And part of that is because she believed if you left a painting on the wall for too long, it essentially stopped being a work of art and became a piece of furniture, and you stopped seeing it. And so for her, moving artwork around, moving furniture around, it was all about having novel stimuli. So a new way to look at the environment around you.
Great. Another question about a specific object that was featured in one of the photographs you showed. One of the pillows looks like it had an image of the Turkish flag or crescent moon and a star. Did Georgia O'Keeffe travel to Turkey? What, and maybe more broadly, how do you see? We know that she was an extensive traveler. How did things that she purchased or found on her travels make it into her designs and her home space?
Yeah, so that Turkish pillow, she did travel to Turkey. She purchased a flag while she was there. She liked the moon and the star symbol. Um, there was no deeper political meaning behind it. And when she got back to the United States, she sewed it into a pillow. She actually did the same with the Japanese flag. As I mentioned, she loved a pop of red, and what better way to do that than using some of these flags as textiles? And when we think about her travels, she was constantly bringing back objects from her travels. And some of those objects fall more into like the decor category, but a lot of what she was buying was incorporated into her day-to-day life. So we have a lot of ceramics from Mexico, a lot of ceramics from Japan. We have rugs she purchased in India. And so when we think about what fills Georgia O'Keeffe's home, there's really three categories. It is a combination of souvenirs from travel, natural objects, and then these modern design objects. And that was really how she filled her space.
Great. And it's so neat to be able to see evidence of that in these photographs and, of course, in person in the rooms as they are today. We have a question which relates a little bit to that. And speaking about Georgia O'Keeffe as a visual artist, as a painter, we know how wonderful she was at those things, but also we know that when she was living at home, she was doing her own sewing, doing her own cooking, doing her own canning, things like that. So the question was, did she do her own sewing? But could you talk a little bit about how her knowledge of sewing and things like that, also how she utilized those skills to transform her space?
Yeah. So O'Keeffe did know how to sew. She was very fond of mending. And I think that is an interesting characteristic of her and her belongings. We have a lot of we have clothes where we can see that she's mended something because it had a hole in it. Same thing with ceramic dishes. If something was slightly chipped or broken, she was still going to keep it. And so O'Keeffe has a lot of these skills. Um, and a lot of that does have to do with growing up on a farm. So learning about pickling, learning about food preservation in general, drying, canning, knowing how to sew, knowing how to garden, knowing how to harvest herbs, knowing how to cook. These were all skills that were so important to her coming out here to New Mexico. And I cannot emphasize enough how unusual it was for a woman to live by herself, to own her own home, and to do that here in rural New Mexico. It was pretty unusual. And it was really important to her that with this relationship with the natural world, that she was also able to live off the land. And today we would call it recycling. I don't think that was really the concept she had in mind, but reusing materials very often, being resourceful. She had lived through the Great Depression, so that was all really ingrained in her. But with all that being said, when O'Keeffe moved here to Abiquiú, she was already a well-established artist. She was one of the highest selling artists in the United States in her lifetime. Not just highest selling female artist, but highest selling artist. And it's very rare for an artist to reach that level of celebrity, that level of success while they're still alive. But O'Keeffe managed to do that, of course, with some help from Alfred Stieglitz and from his gallery. So when she moves here to New Mexico, she's already independently wealthy. And this gives her the privilege and the opportunity to hire staff. And so when she's both here at her Abiquiú house, she'd be here about 6 months, be at the Ghost Ranch house about 6 months. She would have a staff that helped with cooking and cleaning and gardening. And she employed these folks from the surrounding villages. So they're also bringing in their own knowledge, their own cultural practices when it comes to food preparation and preservation, when it comes to things like sewing. And so this really allowed O'Keeffe to focus on painting. She always said that if she didn't have staff to help her, she would be spending her whole day out in the garden. She'd be spending all her time cooking because she loved to do that. But she needed to stay disciplined and she needed to focus on painting because that was her vocation. Now, although she had staff helping her, she did still engage in those activities. And when it came to sewing, that was particularly helpful when it came to interior design because she was very fond of buying just like bolts of fabric, just buying textiles when she would travel, when she would go into stores in the United States, and then taking them back here to Abiquiú and making her own cushions and pillows. And that gave her a lot of freedom with how she was decorating her space and doing all of this custom upholstering and all these custom pillows. It also is really what helped give the space a bit more of a softer personal touch from O'Keeffe.
That's amazing. And so important to want to enjoy every aspect of the place that you're living as much as possible. So you've talked a bit about how Georgia O'Keeffe was able to modify things in her home. For instance, the Noguchi lantern to be able to be that's so interesting, and also fabrics and things to fit the idea of what she felt would be the best application of those things. But do we know if anything was custom designed for her in advance? Where she maybe collaborated with an artist or a designer during the process of having something brought into her home?
I don't have any specific examples of that. I think the bar wall lounger is probably the closest example that we have of that, and that's because when you used to order a bar wall lounger, you got to choose the textiles that were used to create the seat for the chair. And so when she was working with them, there were letters back and forth where they're sending her fabric samples. She's deciding which fabrics she wants used when she's ordering the chairs. But beyond that, these objects, these furnishings, they're being bought as is, and then she's not really customizing them until she gets into the home. And so it is always interesting to think about what would these designers say if they knew that she's taking things such as the Mies van der Rohe Barcelona table, bringing it to her home, and then changing it how she sees fit. Is it really a Mies van der Rohe design anymore if O'Keeffe's the one determining the height of the table, having the legs recast? So yes, she was really doing her own thing once the objects were in her possession.
Right, that's so fascinating. So we just have a couple minutes left, so maybe the best thing to do, would you mind? I suspect that a lot of folks here today are very inspired, and if possible, will want to come and see the Abiquiú home in person. Could you describe a little bit about the different types of tours that are offered through the Welcome Center, and maybe a bit of the logistics of how someone would enroll to do something like that?
Yeah. Okay. So we offer 8 tours a day, Tuesday through Saturday. We have our standard tours. That tour is approximately an hour and 15 minutes. But first thing in the morning, we have our extended tour. So if you're someone who's looking for more time on the property, more time with an expert tour guide to ask your questions, and if you want to see behind the famous black door in the patio to see O'Keeffe's workroom where she prepared her canvases, stored her artwork, you're going to want an extended tour, which is about an hour and 45 minutes. I will add that in the very near future, we'll also be launching our family tour, which is geared towards families with children K through 5. So that'll be coming later this summer. So keep an eye on our website for that. And in order to register for one of these tours, the best way to do it is to go to our website, go to ticketing. And again, I really encourage folks to do this as far in advance as possible. So we do keep the size of the tours quite small, typically only about 8 people per tour. We do this for both the visitor experience, but also to have a capacity for how many people are actually walking through the home, because this visitation does create a certain level of wear and tear, and we do ongoing maintenance, ongoing conservation, but we want to keep the group size a bit smaller in order to protect the home. So please go to our website, try to do so several weeks in advance. We do sell out quite frequently. If you're not able to get a tour, I still encourage you to come up to Abiquiú, come to the Welcome Center, check out the exhibition. They also do a lot of lovely tours over at Ghost Ranch that you can check out, including landscape tours, horseback riding. So even if you don't have a reservation for the home and studio, you could still spend a full day here in Abiquiú and still learn a lot about Georgia O'Keeffe and her landscape.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And hopefully, those of you who are watching will be able to visit in person or can stay tuned for some of those virtual opportunities so you can spend some more time in these incredible spaces. So we are right at 10 o'clock. Justina, thank you so much for sharing all of this incredible information, all of this insight today. And thanks to you and everyone working in Abiquiú. All the incredible work that you're doing is so wonderful. And we do hope that folks joining today will have a chance to experience some of that in person.
All right. Thanks so much, Molly. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Okay. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks again.